Did you know that mathematically we are only 1% human? We tend to treat our gut like a simple fuel tank, but science shows it is actually the control center for our entire life. From our sleep to our mood to how we handle a bad day, it is all happening in the microbiome. In this episode of Flora and Pharma, we are breaking down why we are basically half bacteria and how, if we take care of our gut, it will finally start taking care of us.
Welcome to my channel. Today, we are going to dismantle the idea that mental health happens exclusively in the brain. We usually treat anxiety, sleep issues, and depression as if they are purely psychological problems or chemical imbalances in the brain. But the newest data suggests we've been looking in the wrong place. In this episode, we're going to look at why some people are biologically able to handle stress while others aren't, why we sometimes wake up panicking at 3 in the morning, and why antidepressants might be failing because of our stomach, not our brain. I am Dr. Kava, a pharmacist and a bacteriologist. I'm here with Galen to break down the actual anatomy and connection between the gut and the brain. We've all heard phrases like butterflies in our stomach or gut feeling, but biologically, how does that actually work? To find out, we are looking at study that completely changes how we understand stress. Galen, let's start with the UCLA study from 2024. They looked at the connection between the gut normal bacteria and the resilience. What did they find?
Well, essentially, the research team at UCLA investigated resilience from a physiological rather than psychological perspective. And quite remarkably, what they demonstrated was that stress resilience correlates directly with gut barrier integrity. You see, individuals with compromised barriers showed significantly impaired stress responses.
Oh, hold on. You just said gut barrier integrity. What do you mean by that?
Right. Well, imagine a castle wall. Your gut lining is essentially the wall that separates the food you eat from your bloodstream. In resilient people, that wall is strong, but in anxious people, the wall is crumbling. It is leaky.
So, resilience is not about having a tough mind, it's about the tough stomach lining?
Correct, but, well, here is the frightening part. That wall is only one cell thick. It is incredibly fragile, and if that single layer breaks, stress signals simply flood the system.
Okay, that seems terrifying. So it is just one cell thick. So, apparently it would be so fragile. Let's look at the connection between the gut cells and the nerves. We've been taught for about 50 years that the vagus nerves directly connect the gut cells to the brain like a wire plug into a wall.
Well, that is the classic textbook definition, but biologically speaking, it is incorrect. You see, the vagus nerve never actually touches the gut cell. We used to think there was a direct hard line, but looking closer, we found there is no synaptic contact. Instead, there is a gap, a microscopic distance where the signal has to float. It relies entirely on diffusion, so think of it less like a wired telephone and more like Wi-Fi. To really understand why this matters, you have to look at this study from Flinders University. It was published in 2024. Now, they found that the gut cells, the ones making all the serotonin, they don't physically touch the vagus nerve endings. There is no plug. There's no hardwired synaptic contact. Actually, the nerve endings are sitting away from the cells. You see, the serotonin has to be released. It has to float through that little gap, what we call diffusion, and then it hits the nerve to send the signal up to the brain. And this changes everything, because think about it. If it is wireless, the signal can be jammed. When your gut lining is inflamed, from bad food or antibiotics or just chronic stress, that tissue physically swells, and when it swells, the distance between the cell and the nerve increases. Suddenly that gap is too wide. The serotonin, it can't bridge the distance, it just fades. The signal is lost, so your brain stops receiving that critical safety signal from the gut. And here is the scary part. When the human brain stops hearing safety, it defaults to panic.
So, Anxiety isn't always a brain malfunction, it's a dropped call.
Exactly. And that is why treating the brain so often fails. You are trying to fix the telephone when the problem is the Wi-Fi signal downstairs.
But is this just a temporary thing? Like I eat a bad food and the line gets jammed and I feel anxious for an hour and then does it go back to normal?
In a healthy system? Sure. Yeah. The swelling goes down, the Wi-Fi reconnects. Simple. But what happens when the jam doesn't clear? Like, it just sticks. We need to talk about the leaky signal. Specifically, look at what Stanford University, when they started studying patients with long COVID. Now, you might think of that as a lung issue, right? Respiratory. And, it starts there. But what they found was reservoirs, viral reservoirs, actually hiding in the gut. Even months after the infection was gone from the lungs, the virus was still down there, just sitting there, irritating the lining. And do you know what that constant irritation does to our Wi-Fi connection? It keeps the tissue swollen permanently. The gap remains too wide. The signal is it's permanently dropped, so the brain is waiting. It's waiting for that all clear signal, but it never comes. Instead of a clear connection, you get static. And the brain hates static. It interprets that lack of clear information as a threat. So you have these patients who are physically safe, sitting on their couch, resting, but their brain is trapped. It's trapped in this state of high alert anxiety, not because of their thoughts, but because the phone line to the gut has been cut.
And the gut isn't actually screaming danger and it's just silent. And the brain is filling in that silence with fear?
Precisely. It is a biological false alarm that, it never shuts off. But look, to fix it, you cannot just tell the brain to calm down. It doesn't work. You have to fix the connection. And to fix the connection, you have to ask, why? Why is the tissue swollen in the first place? Why is the line inflamed? It is because the physical barrier, remember that castle wall we talked about, it has been breached. The defences are down. And do you know why the wall is crumbling? Because we fired the maintenance crew.
Wait, maintenance crew? You mean the immune system?
Much older than that. The microbiome. We used to think that our gut bacteria were just passengers, hitchhikers taking up space. But physiologically, they are active metabolic partners. You see, the cells lining your gut, the colonocytes, have a unique dependency on the microbiome. They don't get their energy from your blood. They get it directly from these bacteria. When you eat fibre, things like whole grains, legumes, vegetables, the bacteria break them down to produce a short-chain fatty acid called butyrate. Butyrate is the fuel. It reduces inflammation and it physically seals the gaps between the cells. It is the biological mortar that keeps the wall standing. But if you wipe out the bacteria with antibiotics or a bad diet, that fuel runs out. The cells weaken, the seal breaks, and the gut becomes leaky.
So, we are effectively starving our own defense system. We stop eating fiber, and then the bacteria die off, and the wall just collapses.
Yes, systematically. And when the physical defense goes down, the psychological noise goes up.
Okay, I get the food and diet part, but you mentioned antibiotics. If I took a standard antibiotic like azithromycin last winter for a sinus infection, are you saying that I didn't just kill the infection? I killed the maintenance crew, the normal bacteria in my gut?
Yes, antibiotics are life-saving, but ecologically, they are a carpet bomb. They cannot distinguish between the pathogen causing your sinus infection and the lactobacillus, a normal bacteria in the gut that keeps your anxiety in check. A study published in Nature Microbiology showed that a single course of antibiotics can disrupt the gut ecosystem for months, sometimes years, and while that ecosystem is recovering, the wall is left unguarded. And this is where stress threshold comes in. When that wall is weak, it allows something dangerous to slip through into your bloodstream. Specific toxins called lipopolysaccharides, or LPS. LPS is a structural part of the bacteria, and when they leak out into the blood, your immune system sees them and instantly goes to the highest alert level. It floods your body with inflammatory cytokines. These cytokines travel up to the brain and attack the mood centers, specifically the amygdala. So now, your baseline stress level isn't at 0. It's starting at a 5, like a glass that's already half full. So you aren't mentally weak. You are biologically inflamed.
That actually makes sense. But how do we rebuild it? I mean, I can't go back in time and not take the antibiotics. So what do I do now? How do I stop the leak?
That is a great question. About 10 years ago, we would have just told you to take a probiotic and L-glutamine, but new investigations into the mucosa-associated microbiota have changed the protocol. If your gut lining is inflamed, standard probiotics won't survive. We need to focus on what we call keystone species, specifically one called Akkermansia. A keystone species is an organism that helps hold the system together. Think of Akkermansia as the construction crew that specifically maintains the thickness of the gut wall. When you lose them, the mucus layer thins and the wall collapses. And here is the catch. You cannot get Akkermansia from food. You have to feed it so it grows back itself. So the new protocol is focused on prebiotic fertilization. First, we need polyphenols, red-coloured foods, like pomegranate, cranberries, hibiscus tea. These compounds act like fertilizer specifically for Akkermansia. Second, we need resistant starch, like cooked and cooled potatoes, green bananas. Your body can't digest these, so they travel intact to the colon, where bacteria ferment them into butyrate. Butyrate is the magic molecule here. It is the fuel that literally stimulates the gut cells to seal the gaps.
Okay, pomegranate and cold potatoes. It sounds simple, almost too simple. But how do we know that this isn't just placebo? I mean, if I start eating this way and expecting to feel better, won't I just feel better because I think I'm fixing the gut wall? Is there any actual proof that this changes the brain, or is it all just in my head?
That is exactly what scientists thought until a breakthrough study changed everything. They took healthy mice and gave them a specific kind of good bacteria, lactobacillus. The results were fascinating. Stress hormones dropped and it physically changed the chemistry deep inside the brain. Basically, the gut bacteria increased the brain's ability to calm itself down. But then they did something very interesting. They surgically cut the vagus nerve. That is the main data cable running from the gut, up the neck, directly into the brainstem. After cutting the wire, they gave them the exact same bacteria. And guess what? The magic disappeared. The brain chemistry didn't change. The anxiety stayed high. This was the smoking gun. If it were a placebo, or just some chemical leaking into the blood, cutting a nerve shouldn't matter. But because cutting the wire stopped the effect, we know the bacteria were using that nerve to send a direct signal. You aren't imagining relief. The bacteria are physically phoning your brain to tell it to relax.
So we've already covered the vagus nerve and we've covered the chemical signaling, but is that the whole picture? I mean, the body is a complex machine. Is there any other major connection between the gut and the brain that we're missing here?
Yes, there is. And honestly, this is the one that blows my mind the most. It's not just about structure, and it's not just about mood. It's about time. I mean the clock. Our internal clock. You know, circadian rhythms? Now usually we think of the master clock in the brain. That runs on sunlight, but what we are finding now is that we actually have a second clock. And this one, it doesn't run on sunlight, it runs on food, and it is wound up by bacteria. There was this fascinating research coming out of University College Cork that really cracked this open. They were looking at a specific strain called Lactobacillus reuteri. You might have seen it on yogurt labels. Well, it turns out this little bacteria is doing something huge. It regulates cortisol.
Wait, cortisol, the stress hormone? I thought we wanted less of that.
See, that's the common misconception. We usually think of cortisol as just the panic button, but in a healthy body, cortisol is also your morning coffee. We need a spike of it right at 7 a.m. to wake our organs up, and we need it to drop at 10 p.m. so we can actually sleep. And here is what the study found. When we have Lactobacillus reuteri, that rhythm works perfectly. But when they removed the bacteria, the curve flattened out. The morning spike didn't happen, and the evening drop also didn't happen. The brain was looking for the signal, but the gut, because those bacteria were gone, was silent. So basically, we are effectively living in permanent jet lag without ever getting on a plane. The brain says day, but the gut has no idea what time it is.
Wow, it's fascinating. So, that is the mechanism. It isn't just that bacteria make us happy. It's that bacteria keep our biological day and night in sync with the actual day and night. And when we lose them, we drift. Let's take a look back at the negative effects of antibiotics on good bacteria in our gut while they're killing the bad bacteria. Based on just you said about biological clock, does that mean that the antibiotics are also breaking our sense of time?
That is exactly what they are doing. And honestly, this is the part that medicine has ignored for 50 years. We call it circadian desynchronization. Think about it. You have the master clock in your brain listening to the sun. It says it's morning. But your metabolic organs, your liver, your pancreas, they are listening to the gut. They are waiting for the bacteria to signal. Okay, fuel is coming. Start the engine. But if we take a broad spectrum antibiotic, the signal dies. The bacteria are gone. So the brain screams day, but the liver and pancreas are sitting in silence. They don't know if it's 8 a.m. or midnight. They start working chaotically, and that's what we feel. That is the fog. You know that lingering, weirdly detached feeling people report after a heavy course of drugs? They say, I'm not sick anymore, but I just feel off. See, that isn't fatigue. That is your organs running on different time zones. You are biologically jet-lagged inside your own body.
Okay, biological jet lag. That explains the fatigue, the fog. I get that. But I want to ask about something different. Because when people talk about gut issues and anxiety, they almost always mention sleep. And I don't just mean trouble falling asleep. I'm talking about the 3 a.m. jolt. You fall asleep fine, but then, boom, you wake up, heart racing, sweating, feeling like the world is ending. Can be a part of this jet lag?
It is. But honestly, it's much more aggressive than just jet lag. See, what you are describing isn't a nightmare, and it isn't a panic attack. It is a metabolic emergency, and this is the mechanism that everyone misses. When your microbiome is healthy, those bacteria act like a buffer. They digest your food slowly. They produce short-chain fatty acids. They keep your blood sugar stable through the night. But when that buffer is gone, your blood sugar doesn't stay stable. It becomes volatile. It crashes, and the brain hates it. Think about it. It's 3 a.m. Your sugar drops. The brain senses the crash and thinks, we are out of fuel. We are starving. We are dying. So it pulls the emergency brake. It releases a massive spike of adrenaline and cortisol just to release stored energy and keep you alive. And that adrenaline shot, that is what wakes you up. You jolt awake in a full-blown fight or flight state. But your conscious mind? It doesn't know it's a sugar crash. It just feels the fear. You lay there thinking, why am I so anxious about my job? When in reality, your body just terrified your brain into waking you up to save your life.
Well, that explains the panic. The 3 a.m. jolt. That is the acute fight or flight. But what about the long game? I'm talking about major depression, the heavy, low energy state where you just can't move, because we usually treat that as a brain problem. We say, you don't have enough serotonin or dopamine, so take this pill. But if the gut is the source of the chemicals, are we looking in the wrong place?
We might be. And honestly, this is where the research has really shifted in the last few years. We have to talk about the Flemish Gut Flora project. This was a massive study, published in Nature Microbiology. They looked at over 1,000 people to see if there was a depression signature in the gut, and they discovered that people with depression were consistently missing two specific groups of bacteria, Coprococcus and Dialister. It didn't matter if they were on antidepressants or not. If they were depressed, these bacteria were gone. See, these bacteria aren't just taking up space, they are factories. Specifically, Coprococcus. It produces a metabolite that is structurally similar to dopamine. So think about the implication here. We have been telling patients their depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain, but this data suggests the imbalance might start because the factory in the gut has shut down. It means you aren't just sad, you are biologically depleted. You are trying to run a dopamine engine without the fuel.
But Galen, here is where I get confused, because if you go to a doctor with these symptoms, like low energy, low mood, or changes in sleep, you don't get a gut test. You get a prescription. You get an antidepressant drug like Prozac. So, if the problem is that we are missing the bacteria that make dopamine, do these drugs help bring them back, or are they just masking the shortage?
It is complicated. Antidepressant drugs save lives, and for some people, they are absolutely necessary. But from a microbiome perspective, there was a landmark study in 2018 published in Nature. They screened over 1,000 non-antibiotic drugs to see if they killed bacteria. 24% of them inhibited the growth of gut bacteria in the lab. And do you know what category showed the biggest impact? Antipsychotics and antidepressants drugs. In the petri dish, many of these drugs stop the bacteria from growing. So imagine we are taking a pill to fix our mood. But that same pill might be suppressing the very useful bacteria, like Coprococcus, that we need them to produce the mood chemicals naturally. We are trying to treat the depression symptoms, but at the same time, we might be accidentally suppressing the source.
Galen, I'm going to stop you there because this is getting bleak. We know the gut wall is broken because of any reason, and the factory is shut down, and we don't have the normal bacteria in our gut. So, the logical fix seems simple. If the bacteria are gone, I just put them back. I go to the store or pharmacy and buy a high-quality probiotic. Problem solved?
I wish it were that simple, but we have to look at the landmark data published in Cell in 2018. They found two things that shook the industry. First, they found that for many people, standard probiotics are just tourists. They pass right through the gut system without ever setting up camp. But the second finding, that was more concerning. They looked at people recovering from antibiotics, and they found that the group taking probiotics actually took longer to recover their native microbiome than the group that did nothing. Why? Because the probiotics monopolized the resources. They prevented the native diversity from growing back. So, if you want to fix the scar, you don't need more seeds. You need fertilizer. You need to feed the ancient bacteria, like Akkermansia, that are already hiding in the cracks, waiting to grow.
Okay, what are those fertilizers?
Prebiotics, specific foods, the reds and the whites. Anything deep red or purple, like pomegranate, cranberry, hibiscus tea, even the skin of a red apple, is packed with polyphenols, because Akkermansia, that critical bacterium that builds the gut lining, loves polyphenols. It thrives on them. When we drink pomegranate juice, we are selectively feeding the maintenance crew. That repairs the wall. The whites are resistant starch. This is different from regular carbs. If you eat a hot potato, it turns to sugar. But if you cook that potato and let it cool down in the fridge, the structure changes, it becomes resistant, and you can't digest it, so it travels all the way down to the colon, intact. And when it gets there, the bacteria feast on it, and they ferment it into butyrate, the fuel that heals the gut lining.
What about the inflammation that is causing the brain fog and the depression? Does eating foods with polyphenols like pomegranate or resistant starch put out that inflammation? Or do we need something else to cool the system down?
If you want to aggressively lower inflammation, you need fermented foods. And look, this isn't just folk wisdom. We have to look at the Stanford study from 2021, published in the journal Cell. They ran a head-to-head comparison, one group on a high-fiber diet, the other on a high-fermented food diet. Now, the researchers actually expected the fiber group to win, but they were wrong. The fiber group saw some improvement, yeah, but the fermented food group, their microbiome diversity, exploded, and more importantly, their inflammatory markers, specifically interleukin-6, that same nasty cytokine we see in depressed patients, it dropped significantly. The fermented food essentially extinguished the fire. It acted like an immune reset. So, we need living food every day, like kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, or kombucha, because we aren't just eating calories. We are introducing new genetic information to our gut every single day.
I have one final question, because sometimes, despite all this, we get sick and we have to take antibiotics. So if I have to take a course of antibiotics, is there a way to protect the gut microbiome? Or am I just destined to nuke the whole system and start over?
You are definitely not destined to start over, no. But you have to be smart about what you take and when. See, most people make a classic mistake. They take their antibiotic and they take a standard bacterial probiotic like lactobacillus at the exact same time. And that? It doesn't work. It's a suicide mission. The antibiotic kills the bad bacteria, sure, but it kills the probiotic bacteria just as fast. The alternative is the yeast shield. We have to look at the meta-analysis published in Alimentary Pharmacology and Therapeutics. They looked at 21 randomized trials, and they found that a specific yeast, Saccharomyces boulardii, reduced the risk of antibiotic-associated diarrhea by over 50%. And here is the key. Because it is a fungus, antibiotics cannot kill it. It acts like a placeholder. So while the drugs are carpet bombing your bacterial microbiome, this yeast stays alive. It produces proteases that actually neutralize the toxins from bad bugs, like Clostridium difficile. It's like hiring a security guard who is immune to the fire. Saccharomyces boulardii survives the attack and protects the gut lining. Then, only after the antibiotics course. That is when you can bring in the fermented foods and the fiber to improve the gut microbiome.
Okay, well, thank you. We've already covered a massive amount of ground today, from the vagus nerve anatomy to sleep cycles, and even how antidepressants interact with our biology. Before we sign off, can you pull this all together for us? And how does the gut actually dictate who we are?
It comes down to this. We have to stop looking at mental health and gut health as separate systems. The biology tells us they are the same system. First, we know now that the connection between the gut and the brain is wireless. The Flinders study showed us the vagus nerve doesn't physically touch the gut, it reads chemical signals. So if you have inflammation, like we see in long COVID, that signal gets scrambled, and the brain essentially loses contact with the body. Second thing we know is that resilience is physical, it's not just mind over matter. The UCLA data proves that people who handle stress well, they have a specific bacterial signature that seals the gut barrier. If that barrier leaks, your immune system is chronically fighting toxins, and you physically simply cannot handle stress. Third, your sleep is metabolic. You aren't just waking up panicking because of anxiety. No. Sometimes you're waking up because you've lost the bacteria that manage your cortisol release. The clock is broken. And finally, regarding depression, the Flemish study made it clear. If you are missing specific bacteria, like Coprococcus, you are chemically predisposed to depression. Even antidepressant drug, they need a healthy gut environment to actually function properly. So, you can't therapize your way out of a broken microbiome, you have to fix the biology first.
We used to think we were just humans hosting a few bugs, but the math tells a different story. In terms of cells, we are basically half bacteria. There are about 30 trillion human cells in our bodies, while there are about 40 trillion bacterial cells. And if we look at our total gene numbers, we are 99% microbe. We are barely human at all. So when we treat our gut as just a fuel tank or a plumbing system, we are ignoring the majority of who we are. Clearly, it's the control center for our entire life, our mood, our sleep, and our ability to handle a bad day. It sounds like a relationship we've been neglecting. We can't keep ignoring this system and expecting to feel good. The message of this episode is clear. We have to look after our normal bacteria. We have to feed it, protect it, and respect it. Because if we take care of the gut, it will finally be able to take care of us. Thanks for listening, and please, double check to see if you've subscribed. I really appreciate it. It's critical to keep these podcasts going.